Hello and welcome to Moments in History. I'm Linda Shenton-Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. While researching my books, I unearthed tons of intriguing information that doesn't end up in my stories. So I've created this channel so I can share these tidbits with you. I'm very excited about today's episode. I am interviewing Justin Gamache of the Wright Museum of World War II that's located here in Wolfeboro, New Hampshire. I hope you enjoy this behind-the-scenes look at this gem of a museum. So, Justin, when did you know that you wanted to work in a museum as a curator?
So it's kind of interesting. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I went to college. I knew I wanted to be a history major, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do with that. And it turns out there's a lot of things you can do with a history degree. But when I was in the process, I realized that I've always loved going to museums. Every family vacation, we'd go to a museum or a historic site. So it kind of came natural, and I just thought, how cool would it be to turn that into a career? So it was probably at the end of my junior year, I really decided that I wanted to kind of explore that as an option, and ended up going to grad school for museum studies, and here I am.
So you needed to continue your education. A pure history degree doesn't necessarily, it gives you the information, but it doesn't necessarily prepare you for the career of curator.
Yeah, I think it depends on the role you want to have in the field, but particularly I think for curators, it's helpful to get some museum training for the technical aspect of things.
What kind of classes?
So the degree I have is in, it's still technically called history, just with a focus in museum studies.
Okay.
So it was some general history classes, but also classes on how to work with artifacts and care for them, how to research artifacts and things like that as well.
Sure, I hadn't thought about that, sure. I know about all the white gloves, but
Yep.
and not about what the rest of that is. Okay, so what is your favorite part of being a curator?
I think that my favorite part, I think there are two things that are kind of my favorite. Meeting with people when they bring in artifacts is a lot of fun. We have people calling and emailing almost every day during the summer season with artifacts that they're interested in donating. So getting to meet with them and hear their stories, if they, it's their grandfather's artifact from World War II and they have some story behind it, that's really cool because, you can see how proud they are, and it really drives that history home.
Sure.
And then I think just working with the artifacts themselves, there's nothing like holding a piece of history in your hand and kind of imagining the stories that go with it.
Sure.
So I think those are kind of the two top parts of the job.
Sure. Do you have people that come in and they don't really realize what they have brought you, in a sense?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't really know the stories behind. Unfortunately, war is not a pleasant experience for a lot of people, so they don't talk about the things that they saw. So, they might have their grandfather's item that he took back, but they never really got the story behind it. So sometimes it can be kind of rewarding experience to be able to go through that history and explain what an object is, and that kind of gives them another piece of the story that they may not have gotten.
Yeah, that would be very rewarding, absolutely. Sorry, what does a typical day look like for you?
I'd say there probably aren't any typical days. It's kind of fun working in a small museum. I get to do something different pretty much every day. But a big part of the job is just working with the artifacts, putting things out on the floor, meeting with people when they have things they want to donate. Like I said, we have people calling and emailing almost every day, so several times a week I'm meeting with people, designing exhibits, doing all kinds of curatorial duties like cleaning up artifacts or fixing things in a case that may have tipped over. So every day it's kind of different, but really I guess working with artifacts is kind of the typical day.
Okay. So what is the process if I've come in with a treasure and it's something that the museum needs or is interested in having, and I say, here you go, what happens after it crests the threshold here at the museum?
So what we have to do is, first we have to make sure that they have the legal ability to donate it to us, because we have to be careful about that and make sure that everything is taken care of properly. So the first thing we have to do is fill out some paperwork. Basically, if they're donating it, they're filling out a deed of gift form, and that legally transfers ownership of the object to us, basically so that we can hold it in the public trust and make it available for future generations. So we'll fill out some paperwork with them, and then once the item is in the museum, we have to research it. If there's if they don't know the story behind it, then we have to kind of do some of that research and figure out, maybe this is something we didn't know about, whatever said object is. We can kind of figure out where it would have been, maybe roughly the time that it was used, and then once we do that, we have to photograph it, we have to register it in our database so that we can keep track of it, make sure that we know it's in the museum, but make sure we know where in the museum it is, whether it's in storage or on display, so that if we ever need it for any reason, we can find it, particularly if it's not on display. So we have to go through and put it in the catalog, and then if it's going on display, we have to find a spot for it, because we have so many things that it can be tough to squeeze in new objects sometimes. So there's a whole process that goes on that you don't really see from the public side, but
Sure.
from the time an object walks in the door to goes on display, there's a lot of different steps within that process.
Okay. How does it work if somebody just wants to let you borrow it, or does that ever happen?
It does happen sometimes. We try not to do that too much, just because sometimes if there can be issues if that person passes away and somebody else wants the item back, but we don't know how the legal authority works, so sometimes that can be a gray area, so you just have to be careful. We tend to take things more on a short-term basis. If we're doing a specific exhibit, we might take something in just for the term of that exhibit, but we try to stay away from indefinite loans, things like that.
Yeah, probably wise. Probably wise. Okay. What is your favorite era? And it does not have to be World War II.
World War II probably is up there. It's hard to pick a favorite. Being a history person in general, I have so many different interests, and they're totally random. Some of them are not even related, probably in the slightest. But when I was in an undergrad, my focus was in modern Europe. So I really was looking at World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. And that was probably my favorite era to look at. On the side, in my own personal interests, really interested in pirates. So 1700s Caribbean, kind of history, that's really interesting to me.
Sure.
And of course, general American history, I think is really interesting. So.
Okay, very cool. Okay, so we've talked about what happens when an object comes into the building. What are the steps to creating an exhibit?
That's a big process. I'll kind of give you the abridged version, but basically we have to come up with an idea first. What do we want to do an exhibit on, and why do we want to do that exhibit? What's kind of the message that we're trying to get across? Why is it important for people to learn about this battle or this person or something like that? Okay. So the first stage, and usually we do this in the winter because we're a seasonal museum, is we kind of sit down and we brainstorm what we want the exhibit to be about, what the message is that we want to get across, and then we kind of do a rough sketch. So I will kind of lay out, pick some artifacts from the collection that I think could be useful for that exhibit, and kind of lay out how I would envision them being set up in a display case or on the floor, depending on where the exhibit's going in the museum. Then we are lucky to have some volunteers that are very helpful, one of whom built this barracks that's behind us, and so he can, his name is Bob, and he helps us kind of.
Yeah, I understand he's quite good with
He's very good. He used
tools
to.
and
I don't know if he'll want me to share this, but he used to work for the Smithsonian, so he knows his stuff.
Oh, he sure
and
has.
So he was in exhibit design, so that was his thing. So
wow.
I kind of give him my very, very rough sketch, and he whips into this magical creation that is like a complete exhibit. And then from there, we just get what we need. He can do a lot of the stuff. If it's a big exhibit like this one, he can kind of do a lot of the construction and stuff, which I have very little technical knowledge of, so I rely on him a lot for that. But then we have to go through, do some research on the objects, kind of write out all the copy, all the text that's going to be in it, and then there's putting it all together, wrapping it up in time for our opening in the spring, and then there's the aspect of sharing the exhibit and getting people to come in and see it, so doing all the marketing and all that stuff. So. Wow. It's a big process.
Yeah,
takes most of the winter, for sure.
Yeah, very lengthy, I would think. I would think so. Wow. Okay, so tied to that is how do you decide? My understanding is that you have 18,000 plus.
Somewhere in the ballpark of 18,000.
Okay, that's what I thought, artifacts. How do you decide which of those to display? and how to, I mean, you've talked about Bob kind of pulling things together, but let's say you've got a smaller item or a small display that you're going to make. What goes into how to decide whether they're propped up or laying down or hanging, or, you know, or am I getting too granular? Is that?
No, that is a big part of it. First and foremost, our job is, I kind of mentioned it earlier, to protect items for future generations. So our consideration when we're putting objects on display is how can we display them but balance that with keeping the objects safe. So most museums will kind of rotate things out from the collection periodically just so that, particularly with things like documents and photographs, they're not constantly under light or being exposed to the elements. That can be tough. So we have to think about how can we display it and keep it safe. So different ways of hanging things. One of the exhibits that you helped me work on was displaying sweetheart pillowcases. So we had to come up with a way to hang the pillowcases without putting holes in them.
Right, we couldn't just tack them to the wall.
Couldn't just, you know, tack them into the wall. So using magnets that could be hung on hooks and hold the pillowcases up, strong enough magnets to hold them up, but not enough to damage them.
I loved
and that was a lot of fun, kind of coming up with that solution. Yeah. So there's a lot of consideration that goes into how can we display these effectively, but make sure that they're still safe. And you know, a lot of times it's putting them in cases so that the public can't just touch them. We don't want anyone to walk away with anything, so you know, we have to be careful in that way too.
Sure. Although I will say there is a lot that we can get up close and personal to. I do love that there are things behind glass, and I get that, but there are a lot, for example, for this. And yes, many of our items are reproduction, but not all of them. And so to be able to, standing 4 feet from that, or, you know, being close is, you experience the display and the exhibit so much more personally.
Exactly. It's kind of it's a balance, because you want people to kind of get that feeling that they're immersing themselves, right. And you have to balance that with caring for the artifacts. So, you know, things that are less susceptible to being damaged, you know, we can maybe have a little bit more exposed. But things that are really fragile, you know, we have to be careful. Those are what usually end up behind the glass.
Right, sure. Okay, so what conservation efforts are undertaken to preserve the collection?
So we have a variety of things that we do to keep the artifacts in good shape. The first thing is basically anything that's here, if it's not on display, it's in our archive, which is a secure room. It's got a double alarm system in it, so not anyone can just walk in there. But it has, you know, climate control, humidity control, all of that important stuff. Okay. So the objects are basically, once they're cataloged and everything, if they're not going out onto display, they'll go into the archive. So we have to find a home for those things. So putting it in a box or in a folder, if it's a document, you know, we put it in an acid-free folder so that there's no issues with degradation of the item because it's in the folder. And then the folder goes into an acid-free box, and then the box goes on a shelf that's clearly marked so we know where it is, and we can find it, pull it out when we need it.
Going back to, we have 18,000 items, and
exactly.
we need to be able to find it when we find it, yeah.
So, so that's kind of the basic, you know, it's in that kind of climate-controlled facility, so it's pretty safe in there, but sometimes things, if they're out on display, you know, they can be exposed if they're just in the open. So we have to, you know, be sure we're on top of pest control, things like that. We don't want any moths getting in here and eating away uniforms or anything like that. So if we notice that something like that has happened, which usually doesn't happen, but it can, then we'll take steps. I'm not trained in conservation of things. That's a whole specialized field in its own.
Okay.
So if there was something that really got some damage to it, then we would probably send it off to a professional. Okay. You know, there are companies out there that will do cleaning, so if there's a little bit of mold on something, despite our best efforts, sometimes it's hard to keep a big building like this perfectly, you know, humidity free and everything, so usually we'll send it out to a professional unless it's something that we feel we can do ourselves, but for the most part, we don't have to worry about it, fortunately, well, because
good prevention.
We try to do as much prevention as we can.
Sure. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Moments in History. If you'd like to learn even more history, please stop by my blog that's located at www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to click the like button and subscribe so that you can be sure to receive the episodes that are uploaded the second and fourth Friday of every month. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.